Hi, welcome to Big Guy Boards. This is going to be a review of the Lost El Patron. This is my second review of the board. The first review was one of the first reviews I'd done. I'm waffling quite a lot in that review. You don't really get a good look at the board either. You can't really see the rocker or a template of the board. So I'm going to redo the review now. Design characteristics of this board. So Matt Barlas designed this specifically as a high performance shortboard, but for someone who needs more volume in the surfboard, for whatever the reason, whether that's because you're carrying a bit more weight or you're carrying an injury, whatever reason, you're getting a bit older and your paddle fitness isn't that good. So this packs in volume but doesn't sacrifice on performance. So characteristics of the board, obviously looking at the template, it's your standard high performance shortboard template that you'd expect. So nicely pulled in tail, nicely pulled in nose as well, not too wide. So there's no compromise with more of a hybrid nose or tail there. One thing I noticed as well, which struck me, was how nicely pinched the rails are. So I've been in the market for a while now for a high performance shortboard, and I've always found that the rails always feel way too boxy and just don't feel like they're biting to the wave. And one of the first things I noticed about this, as soon as you pick it up really under your arm, it just feels really good. It feels like it's going to go really well. So yeah, overall design features, what you'd expect. Now the way he's packed in the volume here, so this is a 6.6, it's just under 44 litres, this is 43.5 litres. So generally, to get a performance shortboard with that much volume, you're generally going to be getting a lot more length, or sacrificing with more of a hybrid, wider tail or wider nose. So Matt Barlas has pulled out a few tricks here to get the volume in to such a relatively short length. The way he's done that, for me, it looks like there's quite a lot of thickness carried through the board, but as I say, the thickness doesn't come out to the rails, so it's still got those performance characteristics. One thing that he's done, I'm not going to go through all the design characteristics of the board. You can check that on the the website's blurb or wherever online. But one other thing that I will point out, which is that he's not got as big a stringer in the board because of the thickness of the board. He's realised that there's not as much flex in a board this thick, so to counteract that, he's reduced the stringer. And the thinking behind that is with that much foam, you don't need as much strength with the stringer, and it's also reinforced with this carbon strip as well. So that's one thing, one clever trick out of a number I'm sure that he's done to kind of get the performance in here without compromising. So those are some of the design features. As I say, you can check out more specifics online. But yeah, so waves I've ridden this in. I've ridden it in a range of conditions. So in my last review, I talked about a few different conditions I've ridden it in. I'm going to give you a little update as well since then. So bottom end of the scale, I've ridden it. I'm based in the UK, so I've ridden it probably way too small than it should be for. Obviously, this is a high performance shortboard, and it should be ridden in decent waves with enough push that you don't really need to generate your own speed. When I first got the board, I was riding it in too small a wave for the board really. So maybe below shoulder high, maybe chest, maybe even just below that. And it's no good for those waves really. With this amount of rocker, the length of the board, it doesn't really fit into the wave very well, and it's really hard to generate speed. Obviously, generally, if you're in slightly weaker, smaller waves, you want a lot less rocker to help you generate speed, more width in the tail as well. So for those kind of waves, it's definitely no good, especially in the UK in weaker waves. Since my last review, I've ridden it abroad. I've been to the south of France in the Hoscourt area. The waves are a lot more punchy there. I've ridden this probably shoulder high. It's the smallest I've rode it, and it goes okay in that. So conditions for this board depend on where you are, I think. If you're based in the UK or have similar waves to the UK, so not as much power, I'd say the bottom end of the scale for this is approaching head high in weaker waves. If you've got a bit of punch in the wave, you can probably start at shoulder high. The top end of the scale, so in the UK I've ridden it in solid waves, well overhead, and for me that's when the board really started to come alive. It was a revelation for me how well it performed. After looking for high performance shortboards for such a long time and having to compromise in certain ways, this was unbelievable how well it goes. It really feels snappy and really wants to go vertical. On the open face it feels fantastic as well. And yeah, so the top end of the scale, I've had it in double overhead, the Gravier in Hossegor. I was lucky enough, I've just been there. The sandbanks are really good, so I was surfing there quite a lot, and I had it in really solid waves there, and it felt awesome. I could really trust the board. I didn't have to give a second thought to whether it was gonna hold in those kind of waves, and making the drop was effortless as well. As a comparison, I've recently got the Lost Uber XL, which is more of a step down from this, more designed for average everyday waves, and I've had that board in solid waves, and it got to a point where it was in the back of my mind. I didn't quite trust it in the drop because of the flat rocker, and I didn't really trust it on the bottom turn. So that was really punchy, well overhead waves with that board. With this, I didn't give it a second thought. It felt awesome. So the top end of the scale for this, I think, until you really need the added length for paddle power, and you really want a kind of more pulled in, rounded pin or even a pintail, when you get to that point when it's really solid, up to that, this board will go really well. What I said in my previous review was the sweet spot is quite relatively small on this. So I think part of that for me was not riding such a high performance board in so long. The more performance characteristics you get into a board, the relatively smaller the sweet spot. So since that review, the more I rode the board, the more easy I found it to get on with and get used to. And I think once you start to lock into it, it gets easier to surf. It is not as easy as more of a hybrid shape, but it definitely gets easier to surf the more you ride it. So back home here in the UK, we started to get a few good runs of swell. I was surfing this quite a lot, and it felt awesome. So well overhead waves, a lot of point break. We've got some beach break as well, which isn't working so well at the moment. But in those conditions, like I say, it's absolutely flawless on the open face and really wants to go vertical. And the rocker really fits nicely into the wave. Fin wise, I've only ridden it as a thruster. For me, a shape like this, when you're starting to look at more, traditional shortboard templates, for me, I only really want to ride them as a thruster anyway, for that added control. So I'm not sure what it would go like as a quad. I think you can, if you get custom, you can have the option of a quad. But for me, it's just been ridden as a thruster. So that's been my review of the Lost El Patron. I welcome your comments, and if you want to join in on discussion about this board or any other boards aimed at bigger guys, look for the Big Guy Boards forum on Facebook. Thanks for watching.